Abyss of Secrets, the Antikythera shipwreck. All right, welcome to this explainer. We are jumping right into a story that begins with, honestly, sheer terrifying chaos. Picture this. It's the spring of 1900. A massive, violent storm is just tearing across the Mediterranean Sea. Lightning is flashing across a pitch-black sky, and caught right in the absolute middle of it is this small, ancient-style Greek wooden sailboat. Aboard is Captain Dimitrios Kontos and his crew of 6 sponge divers from the island of Symi. Now, they've been making a dangerous but pretty profitable living diving off the coast of North Africa. But this storm, it has blown them entirely off course. They are literally fighting just to survive the night. With giant waves crashing over the wooden deck and the crew desperately clinging to the beams, Captain Kontos has to make a split-second decision. To keep the ship from being smashed into splinters, he orders his men to drop a heavy iron anchor right near the eastern rocky cliffs of a tiny, remote island they just happened to be passing. That island was Antikythera. It was, an act of pure desperation just to survive the violent waves. But, as we're going to see, that accidental, fateful anchor drop, it changed the course of human history forever. And things escalated incredibly fast. Okay, let's dive into this timeline. We start with that brutal storm in the spring of 1900, but by the very next morning, the first dive happens. By November, a massive excavation is underway, and the whole shebang wraps up by September of 1901. In less than a year and a half, these divers went from fighting for their lives to uncovering something that would completely baffle scientists for over a century. Let's look at exactly what happened when the sun came up. Part 1. Descent into the Abyss, the terrifying dive of Elias Stodiatis. So, the morning after the storm, the Mediterranean was completely calm. Crystal clear, turquoise water. Basically perfect conditions for sponge diving. A young, curly-haired diver named Elias Stodiatis bravely volunteers to go down first. He steps into this massive, heavy canvas diving suit, his life depending entirely on a single, hand-cranked rotary air pump up on the wooden deck. And he sinks down into the dark, murky water to this depth, 60 meters. To put that into perspective, that's nearly 200 feet down. At 60 meters, the pressure of the ocean is 7 times greater than at the surface. Every single breath Elias takes in that heavy bronze helmet is an absolute battle. Every second he spends down in that abyss is borrowed time. But as his boots touch the white sand, he quickly realizes he hasn't found a field of sea sponges. What he finds is utterly terrifying. Peering through the condensation on his glass viewport, Elias sees the ghostly wreckage of a massive 2,000-year-old Roman cargo ship, and scattered all around the rotting timbers and the dim blue light is this eerie field of decaying shapes, marble statues of ancient gods and heroes, just lying in the sand like corpses. Limbs are missing, faces are completely covered in algae. In the dark, Elias reaches out and touches the cold marble face of a figure that literally hadn't been seen by a single human being for 2 millennia. Suddenly, this ancient marble head with hollow, empty eyes stares right back at him. Elias absolutely panics. I mean, who wouldn't? He frantically signals his crewmates to pull him up immediately. When he bursts to the surface, he's barely coherent. They rip the heavy bronze helmet off, and he screams to his completely disbelieving crew, "Dead bodies and horses made of stone." Part 2. The massive naval operation. The very first underwater archaeological expedition in history. So to prove Elias wrong, Captain Kontos puts on the diving suit himself, descends into the abyss, and quickly realizes this wasn't just a shipwreck. It was the largest ancient shipwreck treasure ever discovered, a literal fortune lying in the sand. When the Greek Navy realized the massive scale of this, they immediately dispatched warships to help. But recovering it was an absolute nightmare. During the 9 months of grueling excavation, divers battled something called nitrogen narcosis, also known as the rapture of the deep. Basically, the nitrogen at that extreme depth turned their minds into a thick fog. It creates this terrifying state of hallucination and sensory loss. Just imagine being 60 meters underwater in the freezing dark, and the narcosis makes you actually believe the marble statues are suddenly coming alive and reaching their arms out toward you. Crazy, right? But that is exactly what these divers experienced. And here is why this matters. We have to look at the staggering human cost of this expedition. Because of the incredible pressure and that severe narcosis, a diver could only spend a maximum of 5 minutes on the bottom per dive. Just 5 minutes to navigate a rotting wreck and secure heavy, waterlogged marble. Despite the sheer terror, they relentlessly completed over 200 of these incredibly dangerous dives, but they paid a catastrophic price. The extreme physical limits they pushed resulted in 2 divers being permanently paralyzed from decompression sickness, and tragically, 1 diver actually lost his life to the sea.
Part 3. The Cost of Treasure. Bringing the Antikythera youth to the surface.
Despite the tragedy of it all, the crew hoisted these magnificent, gleaming treasures to the surface. We're talking gold jewelry, terracotta jars, and breathtaking, life-sized bronze statues, like the famous Antikythera youth. The crew marveled as these priceless artifacts saw the Mediterranean sun for the first time in 2,000 years. But completely unnoticed on the deck was something else, a shapeless, highly corroded, ugly green lump roughly the size of a dictionary. Covered in mud and marine calcification, it looked like a completely worthless rock compared to the magnificent statues sitting right beside it. Because it honestly just looked like a chunk of worthless seabed, this small, heavy green lump was carelessly tossed into a dusty wooden crate. When the ship finally arrived at the port in Piraeus, the statues were carefully wrapped in cloth and gently loaded onto horse-drawn carts. But that wooden crate? It was just cataloged, shoved onto a shelf in a dark, cobweb-filled storage basement at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, and entirely forgotten. Nobody gave it a second glance. It sat there in the dark for nearly 2 whole years. But as that rock sat in the dry air of the museum basement, the moisture from the sea slowly began to evaporate. The crust began to crack. Inside that ugly, ignored green lump was something so advanced, so mathematically impossible for its time, that it would eventually force us to rewrite the entire history of human technology. We're talking about something that literally shouldn't exist for another 1,000 years. Which leaves us with the ultimate question. What world-changing secret was hiding inside that ugly green rock? Well, you are definitely not going to want to miss the next part of this massive explainer series to find out.